the shadows between them. The rain had been falling since morning, a steady September drizzle that blurred the edges of the Coleman house into the landscape. The maples out front were half-stripped, their leaves plastered wetly to the driveway, orange and rust like smeared paint. Richard Coleman stood at the upstairs window, tie loosened, suitcase open on the bed behind him. He had grown used to the rhythm of departure. Shirts folded, toiletries tucked into the side pouch, a sheaf of reports waiting in his briefcase. What unsettled him was not the traveling. It was Maggie. He glanced at her now across the room, where she bent over his shirts with slow, deliberate motions. Her hands smoothed each one before laying it into the case, as though stalling. At 60, Maggie was still handsome, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her movements elegant but somehow fragile, as though a crack ran under the surface. When he first met her, college, 1979, a spring formal, they had collided like flint and steel. She was fiery, sharp-tongued, untamable. Now, she was gentle to the point of evasiveness. "Do you have the hotel address written down?" she asked, her voice thin against the rain. "I'll manage," Richard said, and forced a smile. He always managed, but lately he noticed the cracks. Her glances at her phone that she turned quickly face down. Her sudden distance in the evenings, the scent of cologne he didn't wear clinging faintly to her scarf. And then the overcompensation. Her sudden rush to touch his arm, to laugh too brightly, to insist how much she loved him, as though she feared discovery. The truth pressed against him like the damp weather. Something was wrong. The Coleman's life had, for decades, revolved around love and its fruit. Thomas, their eldest, now lived in Chicago with his wife and 2 young boys. Emily, their daughter, divorced, lived 10 miles away with her teenage son, a brooding boy with headphones practically soldered to his ears. The children and grandchildren floated in and out of the Coleman household. Sunday dinners full of chatter and complaints, casseroles and pumpkin pies. Richard loved those dinners, loved seeing Maggie preside like a queen at the table. But in the last months, he had begun to notice how Maggie sometimes withdrew even when surrounded by family. A far-off look in her eye, a faint stiffness in her smile. It was as if some private drama was unspooling behind her, invisible to all but him. That evening, he drove toward the airport under a bruised sky. The rain thickened, slapping the windshield, and the radio murmured of storm surges along the coast. He should have been thinking about clients, contracts, the presentation in Cleveland. Instead, he thought of Maggie, her trembling smile at the door, her too lingering kiss, her whispered, "Come home safe." It was affection laced with fear, as if he might vanish forever. He found himself imagining, against his will, her voice, low and secretive, speaking to another man. The thought hollowed him out. He gripped the wheel tighter, as though by sheer force he could steady the fragile architecture of their life. The week passed in blurred hotel rooms, fluorescent-lit meetings, steak dinners with clients where the laughter felt like papier-mâché. At night, alone in his room, Richard stared at the muted television, the sheets cool and empty beside him. Maggie's texts came dutifully, "Love you. Hope the trip's not too tiring. Can't wait for you to come home." But once, when he called, the line rang and rang, unanswered. When she finally picked up, her breath was uneven, as though she had been running. She claimed she was in the garden. But it was raining heavily that night in Connecticut, and he knew she hated getting wet. When he returned home, the house was dim. The storm had knocked out power. He stepped into silence broken only by the ticking of rain on the roof. The rooms felt charged, like a stage where something had just been enacted. "Maggie?" he called. She appeared in the doorway, candle in hand. Her face flickered in the wavering flame. "You scared me," she said, almost too quickly. She moved toward him, clutching him, kissing his cheek, his neck. The candlelight caught the sheen of tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Richard asked softly, but she only shook her head and pressed herself against him, as though to keep him from slipping away. Later that night, after she fell asleep, Richard wandered the house. He moved through the rooms as though he might catch the house itself whispering truths. In the study, he found a drawer left slightly ajar. Inside lay a letter, its envelope yellowed, its edges curled. It was addressed to Maggie in a hand he didn't recognize. He hesitated, then slipped it out. The letter spoke of love, of choices made long ago, of debts unpaid. The signature was a name Richard had not heard in decades. A friend of theirs from youth, a man who had died suddenly in an accident. Yet here was his voice, inked on paper, intimate, pleading. The date was blurred, the words almost cryptic. "You promised me, Margaret. Promised he would never know." Richard sat in the dark, the letter trembling in his hands. His mind reeled. What promise? What secret had Maggie carried all these years, woven into the fabric of their marriage? A sudden crash startled him. A mirror in the hallway, shattered on the floor as though struck by unseen hands. He rushed to it, heart pounding, but found only the shards gleaming like ice. Rain hammered the roof. Wind rattled the windows. The storm outside seemed to seep into the house itself, as if the world was conspiring to unravel certainty. In the morning, Maggie moved quietly through the kitchen, avoiding his eyes. When he laid the letter before her, she froze. Her hands trembled. "Where did you find this?" "In the desk," Richard said. His voice was steady, though inside he felt as though he were clinging to a cliff's edge. "What does it mean, Maggie?" She sat, folded her hands, and for a long moment said nothing. Then, with a shudder, she whispered, "I was afraid this day would come." Her confession spilled haltingly, of an affair long ago, before children, when their marriage had been new and tempestuous. The man had died, but the memory, the guilt, had lingered. She swore it had ended, that she had buried it for the sake of their family. "I love you, Richard, more than anything. Please, don't leave me. You're all I have." Her words were desperate, her eyes haunted. Richard listened, torn between fury and pity, love and betrayal. Outside, thunder rolled again, though the storm had supposedly passed. He felt the weight of time pressing down. Decades of love, children, grandchildren, dinners, laughter. Could all of it be annulled by a secret buried in the soil of their beginning? That night, unable to sleep, Richard stood at the window once more. The rain had stopped, but mist rose from the earth, coiling through the trees. And then, in the distance, he thought he saw a figure standing by the mailbox, motionless, watching the house. He blinked and the figure was gone, only the mist, shifting like breath. Richard felt a chill climb his spine. He turned back toward the bed where Maggie lay curled, her face slack in sleep, but her hand clutching the blanket as though she feared being abandoned even in dreams. He could not know whether the letter was the whole truth, or only a fragment of something deeper, darker. But he knew one thing. The shadows between them had only begun to stir, and the house, in its silence, seemed to listen.